I stood there watching three HOA board members padlock my own ranch gate while my cattle waited for their morning feed. The chain scraped against metal as Karen Martinez smiled and handed me a citation for agricultural violations. But what she did not know was that I had just spent the morning at the courthouse, and what I discovered in those dusty land records was about to cost her HOA more money than they ever imagined. Because sometimes the best revenge is perfectly legal. 15 years I had lived on my 40-acre ranch at the edge of what used to be nothing but rolling hills and cow pastures. Every morning I would wake up to the sound of my cattle lowing in the distance and the sun painting the sky orange over my weathered fence posts. This was my sanctuary. This was my peace. The old dirt road that connected my property to Highway 287 had been there longer than anyone could remember. Probably carved out by cattle drives in the 1800s, worn smooth by decades of pickup trucks and farm equipment. It was just wide enough for two vehicles to pass if they went slow and careful. Nothing fancy, but it got me where I needed to go. I remember the morning I first saw the survey stakes. Little orange flags stuck in the ground about half a mile east of my property line. Progress, I figured. More neighbors meant more people who might appreciate the quiet country life I had built for myself. Maybe even some folks who understood that cattle and chickens and the smell of hay were part of what made this place special. The construction crews arrived in early spring. Big earth movers and concrete trucks rumbling past my gate every morning, kicking up dust clouds that settled on my porch furniture. I did not mind much. Growing up in ranch country teaches you that change comes whether you like it or not. Better to roll with it than fight what you cannot stop. By summer, the bones of a subdivision were taking shape. Willowbrook Estates, according to the fancy sign they put up at the entrance. 24 lots carved out of what used to be Miller's wheat field, each one big enough for a house with a 2-car garage and a postage stamp yard. The kind of place where every lawn would be the same shade of green and every mailbox would match. I met some of the new residents when they started moving in. The Hendersons seemed nice enough. Retired teacher and a bank manager from Dallas who wanted to try small-town living. They stopped by one evening to introduce themselves and ask about the area. We sat on my porch drinking sweet tea while they told me how excited they were to have authentic ranch neighbors, and asked if I would teach their grandkids about cattle when they visited. That should have been my first warning sign. The way they said authentic ranch neighbors, like I was part of some theme park experience they had bought into. But I was raised to be neighborly, so I smiled and told them my gate was always open if they needed anything. The last house went up in late fall. A big 2-story colonial with white columns and a circular driveway that cost more than most people around here made in 5 years. That was when everything started to change. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. Cream-colored paper with Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, printed in elegant script across the top. I figured it was some kind of welcome wagon thing, maybe an invitation to a neighborhood barbecue or Christmas party. I was wrong. Dear property owner, it began. You are cordially invited to attend the inaugural meeting of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. As a neighboring landowner whose property impacts the aesthetic and property values of our community, your participation in establishing neighborhood standards would be greatly appreciated. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at 7 p.m. in the Hendersons' living room. I almost threw the letter away. I was not part of their subdivision and did not see why their property values were my concern. But curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I figured it might be good to know what my new neighbors were planning. 17 people packed into that living room. Every homeowner from the subdivision plus me. sitting in a folding chair by the fireplace feeling like I had wandered into someone else's family reunion. Everyone else wore pressed slacks and sweaters that still had creases from the store. I showed up in my work jeans and boots because I had been fixing fence all afternoon. Karen Martinez ran the meeting like she was chairing a board of directors instead of talking to neighbors. She stood at the front of the room with a stack of papers and a laser pointer, clicking through slides on a laptop connected to Henderson's big screen TV. Property values, aesthetic standards, community guidelines. She used the word synergy at least 6 times. Our goal, she announced, is to create a cohesive living experience that protects everyone's investment while maintaining the rural charm that drew us all here. She was maybe 50 years old with short blonde hair that never moved and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Everything about her was sharp and polished, from her manicured nails to her expensive handbag. She had moved down from McKinney, where she used to run HOAs for gated communities with names like Sherwood Forest and Regency Park. When she got to the part about neighboring properties that impact our community standards, she looked directly at me. Of course, we understand that agricultural operations have their own unique requirements, she said. But we believe there are ways to maintain working farms while also respecting the residential character our homeowners expect. I raised my hand. What exactly does that mean? Her smile got a little tighter. Well, for example, we might discuss relocating livestock facilities that create noise or odor issues, or perhaps updating outbuildings to match architectural standards that complement our neighborhood aesthetic. The room got quiet. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting to see how I would react. These people had paid good money for their slice of country living, and now they were discovering that actual country came with actual livestock and actual smells. My cattle have been here for 15 years, I said. My barn was built in 1987. I am not planning to change anything. Karen's smile never wavered. Of course, we would never want to impose unreasonable demands, but I think you will find that cooperation benefits everyone. Property values rising in the area help all of us. After the meeting, she cornered me by my truck. Up close, I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was measuring me, figuring out whether I was the type who would roll over or the type who would fight. I hope you will consider working with us, she said. I have experience resolving these kinds of situations. It goes much smoother when everyone is on the same team. I told her I would think about it, but driving home down that old dirt road, I already knew this was going to be a problem. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after the meeting. Official letterhead, certified mail, signature required. 3 pages of complaints about my non-conforming agricultural structures and their impact on community aesthetic standards. They wanted my barn painted to match their approved color palette. Apparently, weathered wood was not acceptable in their vision of rural charm. I threw the letter in my kitchen drawer and forgot about it. The second letter came in January. This one was longer and had words like compliance and enforcement procedures. They were concerned about the noise disturbance created by my rooster crowing at dawn. In addition to repainting my barn, they now wanted me to relocate my chicken coop to the back of my property, where it would not be visible from the subdivision. I called Karen Martinez directly. I got your letter, I said. I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding. I am not part of your HOA. My property is not in your subdivision. I do not answer to your board. I understand your confusion, she replied in that same smooth voice she had used at the meeting. But property rights come with responsibilities to the broader community. Our legal counsel has reviewed the situation, and we believe there are valid grounds for enforcement action if voluntary compliance cannot be achieved. Enforcement action: code violations, nuisance complaints. There are many regulatory avenues available when property owners refuse to be reasonable neighbors. That night I called my nephew Danny, who worked for the county. He told me that Karen had already been to the courthouse twice, filing complaints about my livestock operation. Nothing had come of it yet because I was properly zoned for agricultural use, but she was making noise about health department inspections and environmental violations. The third letter arrived in March with a deadline: 30 days to begin remediation activities or face escalated community action. They had expanded their demands to include relocating my cattle to the back 40 acres because the smell was negatively impacting outdoor activities in the subdivision. They also wanted me to install privacy fencing along our shared property line to screen my industrial agricultural equipment. By industrial agricultural equipment, they meant my 20-year-old pickup truck and the bush hog I used to cut pastures. I wrote them back explaining that I had been running cattle on this land since before their subdivision existed. I had all the proper permits and zoning approvals. I followed all state and county regulations for livestock operations. If they did not like living next to a working ranch, they should have bought property somewhere else. Karen called me the next day. This time the politeness was gone. "You are being unreasonable," she said. "We have 17 families who have invested significant money in this community. Your stubborn refusal to cooperate is affecting all of us." "My cattle were here first," I told her. "That attitude is exactly why this situation requires more formal intervention," she replied. "I had hoped we could resolve this amicably, but it appears you are determined to be difficult." She hung up before I could respond. 2 weeks later, I came home from town to find a county inspector waiting in my driveway. Someone had filed a complaint about improper manure management and potential groundwater contamination. The inspector was apologetic but thorough. He spent 3 hours going over my operation and found 0 violations. "Whoever reported this wasted everyone's time," he told me as he packed up his equipment. "Your setup is cleaner than most commercial operations I inspect, but I have to investigate every complaint that comes in." I knew exactly who had filed that complaint. The fourth letter came with a legal threat. If I did not begin compliance activities within 15 days, they would file suit for creating a continuing nuisance that damaged property values and diminished their peaceful enjoyment of their homes. They were claiming that my agricultural operation constituted a business that was incompatible with residential zoning. That was when I realized Karen Martinez was not going to stop. She had made this personal. In her mind, I was the stubborn old rancher standing in the way of her perfect planned community. She was going to keep pushing until I either gave in or fought back. I decided to fight back. I knew something was wrong the moment I turned down my road. There were cars parked along the shoulder where there had never been cars before. As I got closer, I could see people standing around my gate. Not just standing around it, working on it. My heart started pounding as I pulled up and saw what they were doing. 3 members of the HOA board were installing a chain and padlock across my ranch gate. Karen Martinez stood to the side with a clipboard, directing the operation like some kind of military exercise. I got out of my truck and walked toward them. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Karen looked up from her clipboard with that same cold smile. "Good afternoon. We are securing this access road pending resolution of the ownership dispute." "Ownership dispute? This is my gate on my property." She handed me a folded paper. Actually, according to our survey, this access road crosses land that belongs to the Willowbrook Estates development. The county records show an easement that expired in 1987. You have been using this road illegally for decades. I stared at the document. It was full of legal language and survey coordinates that I did not understand. But the bottom line was clear. They were claiming that the dirt road I had used for 15 years did not legally belong to me. "You cannot just lock me out of my own property," I said. "We are not locking you out," Karen replied. "You still have full access to your land. You just need to find an alternative route that does not cross private property belonging to our development." One of the other board members, a man named Richard Webb, finished attaching the padlock and stepped back. The chain stretched across the road like a metal snake, blocking the only way I had ever used to reach the highway. "This is insane," I said. "I have cattle that need to be fed. I have deliveries coming. You cannot just seal off someone's access road." "Perhaps you should have considered that before refusing to cooperate with reasonable neighborhood standards," Karen said. "Actions have consequences." I called the sheriff's department from my cell phone right there in front of them. Deputy Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, a young guy who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He listened to both sides and shook his head. "This is a civil matter," he told me. "If there is a legitimate dispute about property ownership, you need to resolve it through the courts. I cannot make them remove the chain without a court order. So they can just lock someone out of their own land. If they believe they have legal ownership of the road, they have the right to control access," the deputy said. "You need to talk to a lawyer." Karen Martinez smiled like she had just won the lottery. That night I had to climb over my own fence to get to my cattle. 15 years of driving through that gate, and now I was crawling through barbed wire like some kind of trespasser on my own land. My Herefords gathered around me as I poured feed into their troughs, sensing something was wrong. Cattle are smarter than people give them credit for. They could tell I was upset. Standing in that pasture under a sky full of stars, I felt something I had not felt since my divorce 10 years earlier. Complete helplessness. These people had found a way to hurt me that I had never seen coming. They had turned my own property into a prison. But as I walked back toward the house, climbing through that fence one more time, another feeling started growing in my chest. Anger. Cold, calculating anger. Karen Martinez thought she was clever. She thought she had found the perfect way to force me into submission by cutting off my access to the outside world. What she did not know was that I had grown up in this county. I knew every back road and cow path for 50 miles in any direction. And more importantly, I knew something about their precious subdivision that she apparently did not. I spent the rest of that night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the padlock through my window and thinking. If Karen Martinez wanted to play hardball, I was about to show her what hardball really looked like. The county courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax. I had been there before to pay property taxes and renew my agricultural exemption, but I had never spent time in the records office digging through land deeds and survey maps. The clerk, a woman named Betty who had worked there for 30 years, helped me pull the files I needed. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked as she wheeled out a cart full of bound volumes and manila folders. "I need to know who really owns the road that connects my ranch to Highway 287, I told her. Betty raised her eyebrows. "Someone disputing your easement." "Something like that." It took 4 hours of reading through documents written in legal language that made my head hurt, but I finally found what I was looking for. The original plat map from 1923 showed the dirt road as a county right-of-way established for rural access. It had never been private property. The HOA's survey was based on a boundary description that did not include the road easement. But that was just the first piece of the puzzle. I spent another 2 hours tracing property lines and easements around the Willowbrook Estates development. That was when I discovered something very interesting. The subdivision had been built on land that was completely surrounded by private property. The only access to the development from Highway 287 was through the same dirt road they had just blocked. But there was a second access route that the developers had planned for emergency use. A narrow strip of undeveloped land ran along the back edge of the subdivision, connecting to an old logging road that eventually reached the highway about 3 miles to the north. According to the county maps, this back route crossed private property owned by Bill Henderson, an 80-year-old farmer who lived about 2 miles from my ranch. I knew Bill from the feed store. He was one of those old-timers who had been farming the same land his whole life, watching the county change around him as suburbs crept out from the city. His property was mostly pasture and timber, land that had been in his family for 3 generations. The more I studied those maps, the more I understood the situation. The HOA had blocked my access to the main road, but they had no backup plan if something happened to their own access. Every delivery truck, every construction vehicle, every emergency response unit that needed to reach Willowbrook Estates had to use the same dirt road they were now claiming as private property. But if that road became unavailable for any reason, the only alternative was the back route through Bill Henderson's land. And Bill Henderson had never given anyone permission to cross his property. I made copies of all the relevant documents and drove straight to Bill's house. He was sitting on his porch when I pulled up, smoking a pipe and watching his cattle graze in the afternoon sun. The kind of scene that made you understand why people fought so hard to preserve this way of life. "Afternoon, Bill," I called as I got out of my truck. "Got a minute to talk?" He motioned to the empty chair beside him. "Always got time for a neighbor. What is on your mind?" I spread the county maps across the small table between our chairs and explained the situation. Bill listened without interrupting, occasionally pointing at the maps to clarify property lines or asking questions about the HOA's demands. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he knocked the ash from his pipe and looked at me with eyes that had seen 80 years of people trying to push around folks like us. "How much do you reckon that strip of land is worth?" he asked. I smiled. I was hoping you might ask that question. Bill Henderson and I shook hands on his front porch 3 days later. $5,000 for a quarter-mile strip of pasture land that included the back access route to Willowbrook Estates. The deed transfer would take 2 weeks to process through the county, but Bill was a man of his word. He told me I could start putting up my gate the next morning. "You sure about this?" he asked as we signed the papers on his kitchen table. "That HOA bunch is not going to like what you are planning." "I am counting on that," I told him. The hardware store in town sold me everything I needed: heavy-duty gate posts, galvanized chain-link panels, and the biggest padlock they had in stock. I also bought materials for a small booth and a professionally printed sign that would make everything official. It took me 2 days to install the gate across the back access road. I positioned it at the narrowest point where the road passed between 2 large oak trees, making it impossible for vehicles to go around. The gate was solid and legal, properly positioned on land that I now owned free and clear. The sign I mounted beside the gate was a work of art. "Private property commercial vehicle access toll required, see attendant." I included my phone number and business hours, Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Sundays by appointment only. The toll booth was smaller but just as professional, a simple wooden structure with a window and a clipboard for logging vehicle information. I stocked it with rate sheets and receipt books, everything neat and organized like a legitimate business operation. Because that was exactly what it was. My rate structure was fair but comprehensive. Pickup trucks and passenger cars were $5 each way. Delivery trucks were $25. Construction vehicles and heavy equipment were $50. Commercial waste disposal trucks were $75 because of the wear and tear on the road surface. I offered discount packages for regular customers, a monthly pass for construction crews working on the same project, volume discounts for companies that needed multiple trips per day, professional and reasonable, just like any other toll road operation. The first test came on a Wednesday morning. I was sitting in my toll booth drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I heard the rumble of a large truck engine. Through the trees, I could see a concrete mixer approaching my gate. The driver slowed down as he read my sign, then stopped and climbed out of his cab looking confused. "Morning," I said as I stepped out of the booth. "Where are you headed?" "Willowbrook Estates," he replied. "Got a foundation pour scheduled for 9 o'clock, but the regular road is blocked off. Dispatch told me to use this back route." I handed him a rate sheet. "No problem. That will be $50 for the concrete truck, cash or check accepted." He stared at the paper like I had handed him something written in a foreign language. "You want me to pay $50 to drive down this road?" "Private property," I explained. "This access route crosses my land. Commercial vehicles require a toll fee to cover maintenance and insurance costs." The driver called his dispatcher. I could hear shouting through the phone from 10 feet away. After 5 minutes of heated conversation, he hung up and pulled out his wallet. "This is crazy," he muttered as he handed me $50 in cash. "Just business," I replied, writing him a receipt. "Have a good day." I called Karen Martinez that afternoon to let her know about my new business venture. She was not pleased. "You cannot do this," she said. "This is extortion. You are trying to force us to pay for access to our own neighborhood." "Actually, I am providing a valuable service," I told her. "Your subdivision needs reliable access for emergency vehicles, delivery trucks, and construction crews. My toll road ensures that access is available whenever you need it." "We will sue you." "For what?" "Operating a legitimate business on my own property. I have all the proper permits and insurance coverage. Everything is completely legal." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head as she realized the trap she had walked into. "You did this on purpose," she finally said. "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me that controlling access roads is an effective way to influence people's behavior. I am just applying the same strategy." She hung up without saying goodbye. By the end of the first week, I had collected over $800 in toll fees. Delivery trucks lined up at my gate every morning like customers at a drive-through restaurant. Word had spread quickly through the construction community that Willowbrook Estates could only be reached through Henderson's Toll Road, as the drivers had started calling it. Karen Martinez called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Saturday. I was not invited, but Henderson told me about it afterward. Apparently, 17 homeowners packed into the community center to discuss what they were calling the access crisis. Karen looked like she had not slept in days, Henderson reported. She kept talking about legal options and property rights, but You could tell she was scrambling. Every contractor working in the subdivision is charging extra fees to cover your tolls. The homeowners are furious because their construction projects are going over budget. The media attention started on Monday. A reporter from the county newspaper called to ask about my toll road operation. The story ran on Wednesday with the headline, "Ranch Gate War Escalates as Farmer Fights Back Against HOA." The article included quotes from both sides, but the reporter clearly understood who the real villain was in this situation. Local rancher creates toll road after HOA blocks access to his property, the story began. What started as a neighborhood dispute over agricultural zoning has escalated into a battle over property rights and access roads. Karen Martinez was quoted extensively, talking about extortion tactics and abuse of property rights. But she came across as exactly what she was, someone who had overplayed her hand and was now facing the consequences. The story went viral on social media. Supporters from around the county started calling to congratulate me for standing up to HOA bullies. A few critics accused me of being greedy and vindictive, but they were vastly outnumbered by people who had their own horror stories about power-hungry neighborhood associations. Local TV news picked up the story on Friday. A reporter and camera crew met me at my toll booth for an interview that aired on the evening news. I wore my best shirt and hat, looking like exactly what I was, a working rancher who had been pushed too far. This was never about money, I told the reporter. This was about respect. These people moved next to a working ranch and then decided they wanted to change everything to suit their idea of what the country should look like. When I refused to paint my barn to match their color scheme, they tried to lock me out of my own property. The reporter asked about the toll road. "So this is revenge?" "This is business," I replied. They taught me that controlling access roads is an effective negotiating tool. I am just applying the same principle they used. The legal challenges came the following week. Karen Martinez hired a lawyer to file an injunction against my toll road operation. They claimed it was an illegal restraint of trade and demanded immediate removal of my gate. That was when I played my ace in the hole. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Santos who specialized in property law, had been preparing for this moment since the day I bought Bill's land. She filed a countersuit claiming that the HOA had illegally blocked a county right-of-way when they chained my ranch gate. The dirt road they were calling private property was actually a public easement that had been established in 1923. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Judge Harrison presided, a fair man who had grown up in the county and understood the difference between legitimate property rights and petty harassment. Patricia presented our case with documentation that went back nearly a century. Survey maps, deed records, county right-of-way agreements, and testimony from longtime residents who remembered using the road for decades. The evidence was overwhelming. The HOA's lawyer argued that property records were complex and that good faith disputes over boundary lines were common. He claimed his clients had acted reasonably based on their understanding of the legal situation. Judge Harrison was not impressed. "The county has clear records showing this road as a public right-of-way," he said. "The defendant's survey ignored documented easements that have been on file for decades. This appears to be a deliberate attempt to harass a neighboring property owner rather than a legitimate boundary dispute." He ruled in my favor on all counts. The HOA was ordered to remove their chain and padlock from my ranch gate immediately. They were also required to pay my legal fees and court costs. But he upheld my right to operate the toll road. My property, my rules. Karen Martinez sat in the courtroom looking like someone had punched her in the stomach. Her perfect plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. 3 months after the court ruling, I was sitting at my kitchen table counting toll revenue when Karen Martinez knocked on my door. She looked different than I remembered, smaller somehow. The sharp edges had been worn down by months of legal battles and neighborhood pressure. "I came to apologize," she said when I opened the door. I invited her in and poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat across from each other at the same table where I had planned my response to her gate blockade. The irony was not lost on either of us. "The board voted me out last week," she said. "Apparently, the legal fees and construction delays cost the homeowners more money than they were willing to spend. They think I handled the situation poorly." "You did handle it poorly," I told her. "You could have left me alone and none of this would have happened." She nodded. "I thought I was protecting property values. I thought you would be reasonable if we applied enough pressure." "You thought wrong." Karen looked out my window toward the pasture where my cattle were grazing in the afternoon sun. "I grew up in suburbs," she said. "HOAs were just part of life, rules that everyone followed to keep things orderly and clean. I did not understand what this place meant to you." I had run my toll road operation for 6 months by that point. The total revenue was just over $12,000, money that I used to repair fences, upgrade my cattle handling equipment, and put a new roof on my barn. The original weathered wood color, of course. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "Move back to McKinney," she replied. "My husband got transferred anyway, and I think we have worn out our welcome here." After she left, I walked out to my mailbox and found a letter from the new HOA president. Richard Webb, the man who had helped install the chain on my gate, was now trying to negotiate a peace treaty. The letter was polite and respectful, acknowledging that the previous board had made mistakes and asking if we could find a way to coexist as neighbors. I called him that evening. We had a long conversation about reasonable expectations and mutual respect. He assured me that the new board had no interest in regulating my agricultural operation. They just wanted to focus on maintaining their own community without interfering with surrounding property owners. "We learned an expensive lesson," he admitted. "Karen convinced us that we could force you into compliance, but we ended up making enemies out of neighbors. That is not what any of us wanted." I agreed to reduce my toll rates for regular neighborhood traffic while maintaining higher fees for commercial construction vehicles. It was a compromise that acknowledged everyone's legitimate interests without anyone having to surrender their principles. 6 months later, I took down the toll road entirely. The construction phase of Willowbrook Estates was finished, and the residents had proven that they were willing to respect my property rights. My ranch gate stood open during the day, just like it had for 15 years before Karen Martinez decided to teach me a lesson about cooperation. The final accounting showed that I had collected nearly $18,000 in toll fees over the 10 months I operated the road. After expenses and legal costs, I had enough left over to buy 40 acres of adjoining land that came up for sale. Expansion that would have been impossible without Karen's unintended contribution to my ranch improvement fund. Some of the Willowbrook residents became genuine friends over time. They stopped by to buy fresh eggs and learn about cattle ranching. Their children loved visiting the barn and helping with chores. The community they had envisioned was possible after all, but only when it was built on respect rather than control. I still see Karen Martinez occasionally at the grocery store in town. We nod politely, but do not speak. She looks like someone who learned something important about the difference between leadership and bullying, though I doubt she would ever admit it. My cattle still low at sunrise. My rooster still crows at dawn. My barn is still weathered wood that has never seen a drop of HOA-approved paint. And my gate opens onto the same dirt road that has connected this ranch to the outside world for longer than anyone can remember. Some things are worth fighting for. Sometimes the best way to teach bullies about respect is to show them what happens when they pick on the wrong neighbor.